Charlie Munger, the right-hand man of Warren Buffett, who recently passed with a net worth of over $2.3 billion, has a famous quote. He says, "The first $100,000 is a bitch, but you gotta do it." I don't care what you have to do. If it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon, find a way to get your hands on $100,000. He stresses getting to $100,000 by any legal means necessary. The reason is that your net worth completely explodes after your first 100K. Once you have that seed capital, the momentum of compound interest starts doing the heavy lifting for you. My name is Joe, and I spend way too much time thinking about money and why some people seem to glide past these milestones while others stay stuck in the same financial patterns for decades. If you want to understand the mechanics of wealth without the hype, make sure you're subscribed. It's the best return on investment you'll get on your time today. But here's what most people don't realize about Munger's advice. He wasn't saying that $100,000 is enough to retire on. He wasn't talking about buying a Lamborghini or living on a beach. He was talking about a threshold, a specific tipping point in the physics of money, a place where the rules of the game completely change. He went on to say, "I do not care what you have to do. If it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon, find a way to get your hands on $100,000. After that, you can ease off the gas a little." That last part is the key. You can ease off. Why? Because before that number, you are the engine. After that number, your money starts becoming the engine. Let me paint you a picture of why this specific milestone matters so much. If you were to invest $100 in the stock market or some other type of investment, and you take on some risk, and by the end of the year you make a 10% return, that means you have an extra $10. Now that's not a life-changing amount of money, and I would actually argue that most of us can make $10 an hour doing some sort of job or some sort of task. So in this case, you risked $100 of your hard-earned money, and you have $10 at the end of the year to show for it. That's not very powerful. But here's where it gets really interesting. Let's pretend for a moment that you had $100,000 invested in the stock market and you got that same 10% return. That's $110,000. And what's interesting is that you took on the same amount of risk as in the first scenario. Both scenarios have the same risk, same amount of time taken, but two very different results because the amount of capital that you started with is completely different. This is basically the reason why people say it takes money to make money. The first principle to understand is that capital scales really well. I'm referring to the idea that the benefits or the returns from having capital increase proportionally as the amount of capital itself increases. Now, here's the second principle you need to understand. As you stack up money to your first 100K, it's like rolling a snowball down the hill. As the snowball travels downward, it gets bigger and bigger because it accumulates more snow along the way, and the momentum carries it down the mountain. Let's look at some actual numbers. Imagine you save $10,000 a year and you're able to get a 7% return on your investment in the stock market. The stock market typically returns about 8 to 10% per year, but let's use 7% because of taxes and any fees. Saving up to your first 100K in this case would take you about 7.84 years if you were to save 10K each year and you invested it. But here's something that might blow your mind. A common misconception would be that saving $1 million would then be 7.84 years times 10. But that's actually not the case. In fact, it only takes a fraction of that time to get to $1 million. After you get to 100K, getting to 200K total would only take you 5.1 years. Because now your initial 100K is generating you interest, and you're still keeping at it with the 10K in contributions every year. Then fast forward to 500K, and you can see that each 100K is faster than the previous. You're responsible for contributing 10K per year, while the money you have invested continues to work for you at 7% per year. So knowing this, let's take a look at how long it takes to get to each 100K for the first 500K. In the first 100K, it's 7.84 years, then it's 5.1 years, then it's 3.78 years, 3.01 years, and finally, the fifth 100K only takes you 2.5 years. When you finally get to that $1 million mark, it would have taken you 3.74 years with our assumptions. Let me give you the breakdown. The first 100K took you 7.84 years, or 25.5% of the total amount of time it took to get to $1 million. The remaining 900K took 74.5% of the time. And isn't that kind of funny because that means your wealth accumulation is disproportionately harder in the beginning of this entire thing? By the way, if you're curious, the next 100K after you hit $1 million is only 15 months, and that's only 15% of the time that it actually took you to get your first 100K. Okay, so hopefully this illustrates to you that your net worth absolutely explodes after you hit 100K. But even more importantly, it shows you that if we can get to 100K faster than 7.84 years, then we're going to have so much more time for a crap ton of wealth accumulation. Essentially, all the friction of wealth accumulation is in the beginning, in the first 100K. And that's why Charlie Munger says it's a brutal word, and that's why you should do everything that you can to get there. But wait, there's more to this than just the raw numbers. When Munga made that comment back in the 90s, he was talking about a very specific phenomenon that happens in the physics of money. Before we dive deeper, do me a favor. If you want to understand the mechanics of wealth without the hype, make sure you're subscribed. It's the best return on investment you will get on your time today. Let's look at why the 0 to 100K journey feels so slow. It comes down to a simple reality. When your portfolio is tiny, your contributions dominate the growth, not the market returns. Compounding is technically working, but it is invisible. Let's say you have $3,000 invested, a 10% return, which is a great year, gives you $300. That is nice. I guess it pays for a few grocery runs, but it doesn't change your life. It doesn't make you feel wealthy. You could save that same $300 just by skipping a few dinners out. At this stage, every extra dollar you save physically matters more than squeezing an extra 1 or 2% out of the stock market. Bankrate ran a scenario that perfectly illustrates this pain. Imagine you invest $6,000 a year, that is $500 a month. And let's assume a solid 7% annual return. At the end of year 5, you have contributed $30,000 of your own cash. Your portfolio balance sits at roughly $34,000. Do the math on that. Only about $4,500 of that total is growth. 85% of the money sitting there came from your own sweat, your own paycheck, and your own discipline. You have been grinding for 5 years, and the market has barely bought you a used car. This is the danger zone. This is where people look at their accounts and say, this isn't working. They see 5 years of sacrifice and barely any passive income to show for it, but they are missing the forest for the trees. Here's the thing that usually causes people to fail right here. It isn't the math. It's the realization that you could have spent that money and had way more fun. You look at that $4,000 of profit after 5 years and think, I could have just bought a nicer car or gone on vacation and my life would be exactly the same. But if you stop here, you are walking away right before the explosion happens, because what happens next is not linear, it is exponential. And if you miss the next 3 years, you lose decades of freedom. So what changes at $100,000? The market doesn't change. The stocks are the same, but the math flips. Once you have $100,000 invested, a 7% return is $7,000 in a single year. Now pause and think about that. $7,000. For many people, that is more than they can physically save in a year. Suddenly, your portfolio is contributing as much to your net worth as you are. You have effectively hired a second worker who shows up every day, doesn't complain, doesn't drink your coffee, and adds $7,000 to your pile without you lifting a finger. Let's go back to that Bankrate example. You are still putting in your $6,000 a year. After 20 years, you have put in a total of $120,000 of your own cash. But your account balance, it's around $245,000. Over $125,000 of that is pure growth. The crossover point happens somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000. That is the moment where the money your money makes exceeds the money you make. This is the snowball Munger was talking about. 4-Pillar Freedom visualized this beautifully by slicing net worth into $100,000 chunks. They found that each subsequent $100,000 arrives faster than the last, even if you never increase your monthly savings by a single cent. It might take you 7 or 8 years to grind from 0 to 100,000. That is a long time. But going from 100,000 to 200,000, that might only take 5 years. Then going from 200 to 300 might take 3 years. By the time you are looking at huge numbers, you are adding $100,000 to your net worth every couple of years just by waking up in the morning. This brings us to a controversial idea. Many people think the hardest milestone is becoming a millionaire. It sounds the most impressive, but mathematically, the gap between 0 and 100,000 is infinitely harder than the gap between 100,000 and 1 million. To get to your first six figures, you have to multiply your starting wealth by a factor of 100 if you start with $1,000. To get from six figures to a million, you only need a 10x return. The heavy lifting is already done. But here's where it gets really interesting. There is a hidden enemy that makes the first phase even worse than the math suggests. There is a psychological layer on top of the math that makes this first phase a meat grinder. When you are starting out, you are battling on two fronts: external barriers and internal barriers. Externally, this is usually when your income is lowest. You might be early in your career, dealing with student loans, or facing high rent relative to your salary. When every dollar counts, saving a few hundred a month feels like a punishment. You are actively lowering your quality of life today for a future that feels fake. Meanwhile, your portfolio isn't big enough to give you any dopamine hits. You check your account and it's flat. It feels pointless. Internally, you haven't built the identity of an investor yet. It is easy to tell yourself a story. I am not good with money. This is too slow. I will worry about this when I make more money. Bankrate calls these the psychological obstacles keeping you from your first 100,000. You'd have to push through a 5 to 7 year phase where discipline matters far more than returns. But here's the good news. By the time you hit 100,000, you are a different person. You have built the calluses. You have seen the math work. You have probably survived a market dip or two without panic selling. You aren't just richer, you are harder to kill. Recent financial writers have started calling the $100,000 mark the wealth acceleration point. It is the specific level of capital that flips your growth mix from mostly savings to mostly compounding. One article I read recently put it bluntly: the first 100,000 you save isn't just a milestone, it is the point that 90% of people never reach. If you can get there, you have effectively filtered yourself out of the majority of the population who live paycheck to paycheck. You have crossed the chasm. The wind is finally at your back. This is one of the biggest problems that I see going on with some of my friends as well as this generation right now. We live in an instant gratification world, and oftentimes we're not thinking about the consequences of our spending before we do them. I see my friends, they don't have close to 100,000 in net worth just quite yet, but they're tirelessly blaming society and rage spending all the money that they have because they'd rather live in the moment because they can't afford anything. While I definitely agree that you should try to still live your life, and knowing that cost of living is still incredibly expensive, I still think we should still be reasonable with any of the dollars that we have left. Knowing what you know now about how important the first $100,000 is to hit, how does that change your perception around a night out of drinking or perhaps impulse shopping to buy the latest, trendiest clothing, or perhaps spending $300 more per month on a car payment than you actually need? Before you hit $100,000 in net worth, you have to realize that every single dollar is so much more important, especially in the beginning. And that's probably why you hear all these people on social media saying that you shouldn't buy coffee, or as millennials, we shouldn't be eating avocado toast. There's some truth to the fact that you should be saving as much as you can when you're younger and trying to accumulate that wealth. My dad always has this saying that he tells me, which is, $1 million, son, it's made up of 1 million single $1 bills. It's a really simple saying, but I think what the importance of it is that every single dollar matters. And slowly, as you stack up these $1, $1 bills, then you get to a bigger number, let's say 1,000, 5,000, or 10,000, and then it becomes more meaningful. The takeaway here is that you need to stack up your chips slowly and save up to $100,000. Now, here's something that most people don't realize about the $100,000 milestone. The majority of the benefit doesn't come from spending the money, it comes from knowing the money is there. Let me give you a concrete example. Contrary to what people believe, the first 100K is actually not purely just investment returns in the market. Take a look at this calculator from the 4-Pillar Freedom blog. If you save $15,000 a year for 6 years, and you're able to attain a modest 4.5% return on your savings, you would be at $105,000 after 6 years, but 85% of that would have been comprised of savings and 15% would be the investment returns. In another example, let's say you save $110,000 per year, but you average a 10% return. It will take you 7 years at a 10% return. and your savings will comprise 67% of the total. Here, the point is that rarely your first $100,000 will be made just from investment gains. It really just comes to being smart with your money, spending a lot less money, and trying to earn more money down the road. Okay, so if you want $100,000 as soon as possible, I have three strategies that I want to share with you guys. Two of these strategies are famously named by the book The Millionaire Next Door, which I will refer to in this section, but these are all really great strategies for you to get started. Strategy number one is to increase your offense. This is somewhat of a sports or a gaming analogy here. A big factor affecting your path to $100,000 is to, as quickly as possible, try to increase the amount of income that you're earning on an everyday basis. Regardless of your income level, your offense should be really focused on building that wealth. This is where you can take on continuing classes for certifications. You could try new side hustles or perhaps some freelance work, or you can try to switch jobs if the opportunity presents itself. Another option is to invest your money in stocks, real estate, or any other type of businesses. You can also develop a high income skill in the next year or so. The idea here is that your time should be spent thinking about how your resources and your time can be allocated to building wealth rather than spending it. Which actually brings me to strategy number two, which is playing good defense. I'm going to read you guys a quote from the book that I just referenced, The Millionaire Next Door. This is an older book from the 90s, but it says here that if you cannot increase your compensation significantly, become wealthy some other way. Do it defensively. The whole premise of this book is that it studied the 95% of Americans who had over $1 million in net worth. And it actually found that most of these people were regular people who just had consistent foundational financial lifestyles. It found that many of those millionaires played good defense even if their income wasn't as high as it could be. So defense in this context means that we are figuring out strategically how to spend less money. That means actionable items like planning the year ahead, budgeting, and cutting back on some discretionary categories that we might be spending too much money in. For example, do you know how much you spent in total eating out last year? I bet you most people that I asked that question to will probably not know. But the idea here is that most people in this book, the millionaires, they actually knew. It's not that they loved budgeting or anything, it's just that they needed to do it in order to make sure that their spending was kept at a good level. Now, strategy number three is to maximize the efficiency of the dollars that you do have. If you live in any Western country, you know that the government loves taking a portion of your pay. In some countries, that can be upwards of 50%. But here in America, the highest federal tax bracket rate is about 37%. So an easy way to accumulate and keep more of your money is to do so in some sort of tax-sheltered account like the Roth IRA, the traditional IRA, or your 401k plans. The Roth IRA, your earnings grow tax-free. In the traditional IRA, at least you're getting a tax deduction on the amount that you contribute in any single year. And with the 401k, at least you can get some employer match so that you get some free money, as well as some of the tax benefits as well. If you can maximize your dollars in this type of way, you're getting a tax shelter, which means that the government is going to be taking that 37% away from you at the end of the day. That means you're going to be increasing your wealth a little bit faster. And we know that the friction is all in the beginning. So if we can get over that hump as quickly as possible, that's going to be good for us. Another efficiency you should consider is getting a high yield savings account. If your cash is just sitting in a bigger bank's checking account, earning you 0.01% in interest, that's really not efficient at all. You should try to move some of that money into high yield savings accounts, of which there are so many out there these days that pay upwards of 4 to 5% on your money. But here's the part that will blow your mind. The hardest part of going from 0 to 100,000 is that your income is usually at its lowest point. So you have to pull every lever available. People who hit this number fast usually do three things. One, they aggressively increase income through job hopping or side hustles. Two, they keep their lifestyle fixed even when they get a raise. They don't move into the luxury apartment the second they get a promotion. And three, they dump every single windfall, tax refunds, bonuses, birthday money straight into the market. They don't treat that money as fun money. They treat it as bricks for the fortress they're building. I can hear some of you shouting at the screen right now. Charlie Munger said this 30 years ago. $100,000 isn't what it used to be. Inflation has killed this advice. You are partially right, but mostly wrong. The specific number has changed. Adjusted for inflation, Munger's 100,000 is probably closer to 200,000 or 250,000 today. But the principle is timeless. The physics haven't changed. Whether your number is 100,000, 200,000, or 50,000, the shape of the curve is the same. The first meaningful chunk of capital is always the hardest because it relies entirely on you. You can pick your own hard number based on your cost of living. Maybe for you, the snowball starts rolling at 50,000. The point isn't the digit on the screen. The point is reaching the velocity where your money starts working harder than you do. Do not let inflation be an excuse to not start. If the finish line moved further away, that is just more reason to start running today. To wrap this up, I want to give you a simple mental model to carry with you. Think of your wealth journey in three distinct phases. Phase 1 is the muscle phase. This is 0 to 100,000. The reality here is that returns don't matter much. Your job is to build the muscles of budgeting, saying no to consumerism, and increasing your income. Your mindset should be this feels unfairly hard and that is normal. 4-Pillar Freedom ran the numbers and showed that in the first 7 years, your investment return, whether it is 5% or 10%, barely changes how long it takes to hit 100,000. The only variable that matters is how much cash you shove into the machine. This means you can stop stressing about finding the perfect ETF or the next crypto moonshot. That is a distraction. Your job right now is boring. It is the brutal basics, a high savings rate, avoiding dumb consumer debt, and maximizing your income. You cannot outinvest a low savings rate when you have a small balance. Step 2 is treating this like a non-negotiable mission. Remember Munger's line about walking everywhere and using coupons? He didn't mean you should literally starve. He meant you need to be temporarily extreme. You have to be willing to live below your means for a concentrated period of time to get the snowball rolling. This season of sacrifice won't last forever. That is the key mental switch. You aren't signing up for a lifetime of misery. You are signing up for a 3 to 5 year sprint to build a foundation that will serve you for the next 50 years. If you can lock in a 40 or 50% savings rate while you are young, or before lifestyle creep sets in, you can cut that 7-year slog down to 3 or 4 years. Phase 2 is the snowball phase. This is 100,000 to 500,000. Here, compounding becomes visible. Your job is to stay invested and not break the machine you built. Phase 3 is the acceleration phase, 500,000 and up. Here, your portfolio moves by tens of thousands of dollars on a random Tuesday. This is where you have earned the right to rebalance your life versus your money. If you are in phase 1, don't get discouraged by the lack of progress. You are building the foundation of a skyscraper. Of course, you can't see it above ground yet. You busted your tail to get to 10,000, then 20,000. Those weren't pointless. Those were the training arcs. Now pushing to 100,000 flips the script. It is the gateway to the world where money is a tool, not a master. Munger was right. It is a brutal word, but it is the most important brutal word you will ever conquer. I want to hear from you in the comments. Where are you on this curve? Are you in the muscle phase, the snowball phase, or have you hit acceleration? And if you have passed 100K, did you feel that shift where the math started helping you? If you found this helpful, hit that like button so the algorithm shares the math with more people. I'm Joe, and I'll see you in the next one.